she did manage to get quite far until she sort of got pulled back.
So in the end, she was sort of escorted away, was she?
Yes, yeah, quite forcefully.
An Australian senator has interrupted the King and Queen's visit to Parliament House in Canberra. King Charles had just finished giving a speech on the second official day of engagements during his tour of Australia when the independent politician Lidia Thorpe shouted towards him and Queen Camilla. She was then escorted out of the Great Hall. When the orchestra strikes up.
So genteel, isn't it?
So genteel. It is like the Oscars when they're just trying to get someone to wrap up. The Times' royal editor, Kate Mansey, was in the room.
I'm currently standing in the Great Hall at Parliament House, and this is where the King gave a speech. His speech came after a speech by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. And just as Charles was finishing his speech, he went to sit down, we saw an outburst by one of the members of the congregation. It was actually a Victoria senator called Lidia Thorpe, who has been vocal in the past on indigenous rights issues. And she came out of, in the reception, there's little areas where people were sitting and standing with a kind of clear aisle down the middle. She broke out of one of those sections, walked down the middle of the aisle. She's wearing a sort of traditional indigenous coat and started shouting, "You're not my king," talking about rights for indigenous people. And she actually got quite far before security kind of grabbed her and took her away. I mean, this is an elected politician. It's important to point out this isn't just a member of the public. So I think it carries quite a lot of weight.
So what was the reaction in the room?
Well, sort of, first there was shock. Partly because this is the people who are here, and there's still some people probably can hear in the background milling around. People who are here have all been vetted. They're all members of Parliament or been voted in by their various constituencies around Australia. So these, it was unexpected, I should say. The King and Queen suddenly sort of turned and started talking to the person to the side of them. They seemed quite relaxed, and it seemed quite clear that she wasn't going to do anything violent. It was just sort of getting her point of view across. She did manage to get quite far until she sort of got pulled back.
So in the end, she was sort of escorted away, was she?
Yes, yeah, quite forcefully. Background of this, of course, is that last year there was a referendum that was put to the whole of Australia to see if they had to ensure that they could have what was called the voice, so a greater access to Parliament and the judicial system for Indigenous people. That vote was rejected because it would change the constitution. Some people, a lot of people disagreed with it. But since then, there's been this sort of simmering kind of resentment and anger. And what we've seen today here in Canberra is it's not actually the Republican issue of whether Australia should reject the King as their head of state, which seems to be put on the back burner even by the Republican government, the Labour government here. But this issue of Indigenous rights, they had a welcome ceremony in traditional Indigenous smoking ceremony when they landed in Canberra this morning. But this issue is certainly not going away, and she was sort of tying it into the Crown. She thinks that land has been stolen. She thinks the King should issue an apology. And it was interesting. It sort of died down. The King and Queen didn't reference it, and afterwards they came to meet members of the delegation here, and there was no sort of mention of it at all. And this went outside now to greet members of the public before they were taken away in the motorcade.
And I suppose, obviously, it comes off the back of speculation in the lead up to this visit about how Australia would react and how many Australians feel about the monarchy these days. I mean, leaving this aside, until now, Kate, how was the trip going?
Well, I think the trip so far has been going pretty well for them. The King looks tired. There's been some concern over jet lag. He's made sort of jokes about it. When he was in church on Sunday, he was signing the book there and had to he sort of jokingly asked, "What day is it?" Which is, 75. He's he's suffering from cancer. He's paused his treatment while he's come over to this, his first visit of a Commonwealth realm for his reign, and his first visit to Australia for quite some time. So this will affect them, and I think far aside from whether Australia should move away from the monarchy or not, there's this issue of reparation for rights for indigenous people whose lands were taken away from them, this issue of colonisation and what the king represents for some of these groups, and I think that's going to be the kind of sticking point, and it sort of feels like it's set the tone now for the rest of the trip. He's still got some engagements this afternoon in Canberra before he flies back to Sydney, and then tomorrow there's a full day in Sydney of various engagements and events. So it'll be interesting to see how this shapes the tone or affects the tone of the trip.
That's really interesting. So actually that kind of constitutional question around whether Australia should become a republic one day, that's almost taking a backseat to this kind of legacy of, you know, the treatment of indigenous people and this sense that the king is representative of colonialism. That's
right. I think what we're going back into now is more of an issue of, you know, Britain's role in the past in the forging of Australia, and I think that's given that this vote that the referendum for the voice was defeated last year, there is a kind of, this has simmered. I was speaking to one of the other journalists saying this has simmered for a long time. This is the real issue. This is the thing that's really going to make or break the royal visit.
But he did have a meeting, did he not, with the new Governor-General of Australia, who previously has kind of expressed some Republican sentiments. How did that meeting go?
It felt slightly awkward to me, and I think that's the issue with the trip, is that there's a Labour government here who have made no secret of the fact that they want to have a republic for Australia. They don't want to have the king as head of state. So we're meeting, the king's been meeting Prime Minister, who has made his views very well known on the subject. There's a Governor General who's been very well known, and she was talking to him about jet lag, and he said, "Well, I don't know why I can't sleep." And she said, "Well, come around the other side of the world." And it was a slightly awkward encounter, I think. But having said that, the Prime Minister today, before the protest, gave a very warm speech and said, whatever happens, we have this warm relationship, and spoke of a kind of bonds that tie the two countries.
That's the Times' royal editor, Kate Mansey.
I really am enormously touched by those very kind welcomes and by your invitation, Prime Minister, to say a few words here in Parliament House, the national home of Australia's strong and vibrant democratic tradition. Let me also say how deeply I appreciated this morning's moving Welcome to Country ceremony, which offers me the opportunity to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, the Ngunnawal people and all First Nations peoples who have loved and cared for this continent for 65,000 years.
Pull out. You're going to have to pull out. Just put your thumbs down, enjoy the moment.